Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first ever Boston and Gordon College Student Chapter joint meeting. My name is Vicki Best, and I'm the Director of Operations and Development for the American Scientific Affiliation. I also co-lead the Boston chapter along with Craig Story and Randy Isaac, and provide leadership to the Gordon Student Chapter along with Angie Cornwell. Tonight we are hosting live from the ASA office here in Topsfield, Massachusetts, and we're just delighted to see this diverse audience of, I believe, about 61 people registered to date from all over the world, including some of our own Boston chapter members, several ASA members from around North America, thanks to the beauty of Zoom, some of my colleagues who I will introduce in a few minutes, many friends and supporters from the North Shore. And I want to offer a warm welcome to our 30 plus Gordon faculty and students, including several of our student chapter leaders. We even have a member from Australia that is with us tonight. So welcome, Jeremy. Feel free to use the chat feature. I see some of you have already done that, and feel free to introduce yourself and say where you're from and get to know each other throughout the meeting. For those of you that are not familiar with the ASA, we are founded in 1941 as an international network of Christians in and interested in the sciences. And as scientists, ASA members take part in humanity's exploration of nature and its laws. And as Christians, ASA members want to know not just the how universe came into being and operates, but why it exists in the first place. We in the ASA believe that God is both the creator of our vast universe and the source of our ability to pursue knowledge. Also, that honest and open studies of both scripture and nature are mutually beneficial in developing a full understanding of human identity and our environment. We engage the faith and science dialogue along three primary platforms. The first one is discovery, ideas, and scholarship. Secondly, professional development, career and calling. And then thirdly, fellowship and networking. We have 4,000 members and followers worldwide that are engaged in the natural and social sciences, engineering, research, industry, medical field, theology, philosophy, and so on. We have three primary activities that I want to talk to you about tonight and give you a glimpse into what we do on a day-to-day basis. The crown jewel of the organization is our quarterly peer-reviewed academic journal called Perspectives on Science and Christian Faith, and we've been producing this for about 75 years now. We also put out a quarterly, what I call more contemporary piece that's an online piece called God and Nature. And you may have caught the special edition that just came out this summer on the COVID-19 pandemic. And one of our own, Angie Cornwell, who is with us tonight, wrote an essay on the COVID-19 bucket list. Sai and Aniko Gart are our editors of the God and Nature, and you see them in the photograph here with Francis Collins. And in fact, Sai is speaking this coming Sunday at one of our student chapters in California, Cal Baptist University, and then he's planning to join the Gordon student chapter this fall as well. Another primary activity of the ASA is our annual meetings, and some of you may have attended our meeting. We had our meeting at Gordon in 2018. We've met for 75 of the 79 years we've been in existence. This summer was the first summer that we had to cancel in 75 years, but the good news is we've rolled forward our program from this summer to next summer at Point Loma Nazarene University. And if you've never been on that campus, it is quite the campus. I've traveled a lot and been on a lot of college campuses, and I have to say it's the nicest college campus I've ever been on. It's got views of the Pacific from pretty much every building. So we're planning to be there next summer with a great lineup of speakers. Our theme is exploring creation. Our annual meetings are a 4-day event composed of plenary talks, breakout sessions. We build in some field trips, great networking opportunities, social events. poster session for our students. And it's really a great way to come together and to rub elbows with top-notch scientists who are serious about their faith. Good news for students as students come to our annual meetings for free. Their registration is scholarshiped, and then we also offer scholarshiping for room and board. So any of students that are in the audience tonight, please feel free to ask any questions and think about joining us next summer. Another pillar of the organization is our local chapters, and they really are the lifeblood of what we do. And we've got 36 chapters across North America. We have 25 here in the US and another 11 in Canada. And of those, we have 5 student chapters, and I'm proud to say that Gordon was our inaugural school student chapter. Each chapter has its own flavor and distinctiveness, and that's what makes them unique. There's not a cookie cutter model, but we give everybody the ability to bring in their own creativity. The Gordon student chapter and Boston chapters typically meet quarterly, and we move around between Gordon, MIT, and Grace Chapel, and now we're safely holding meetings in Zoom, which has been neat to see. So anybody that is local to the area, interested in the topic or the speaker, and interested in the intersection of faith and science is welcome to join us at a chapter meeting. In terms of our membership, I mentioned we had about 4,000 members and followers. A full membership is $85 a year. Retired is $45. Again, for students, those of you that are in the audience, student memberships are free, and we have 500 students around the world that are part of our membership. So we'd love to have you to join and be part of who we are. And for those of you that are in the audience tonight that are not members, we have a special promo offer tonight, promo code ASA 2020 gift. And my colleagues will put the code and the link in the chat function. So feel free to take advantage of that offer and join. And speaking of members, we're very proud of the fact that Francis Collins is a top-notch member of our organization. He's a fellow. Most of you know who he is. He's the director of the NIH, led the Genome Project. He's the author of the Language of God book, and he is also the 2020 Templeton Prize Laureate. Some of you may have heard of this. The ceremony is coming up on September 24th, and this year, because everything is being held virtually, they are opening the ceremony to the public. So you are more than welcome to attend this ceremony. It's going to be live from the National Academy of Sciences with John Templeton Foundation President Heather Dill and Francis in attendance. There'll be a Q&A at the end. So we'd love to have you, and we're spreading the word, so feel free to join. Again, we'll put the link in the chat function, and you can register and sign up to come. Francis has been a real active member of the ASA and an ambassador, and many of our members tell us that they have become members by reading Francis's Language of God book. So also, please be in prayer for him. He's obviously under a lot of stress, and we want to pray that he has the strength to keep serving and the right words in every interview, and just wisdom and leading us all to a safe and effective vaccine. The beauty of Zoom is that a lot of people are able to participate that wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity. And so tonight is a great example. I've mentioned there's many people here from all over the world, which has really been a neat opportunity for us in the ASA. And I want to take the opportunity and introduce some of my staff that is able to be here tonight. First of all, Becky English, who works with me here in the home office in Topsfield. She's in the office next door, and here she is here. She's our membership and outreach manager. Dana Oleskowitz is with us tonight, too. Dana, give a wave from your desk in Ohio. Dana is our local chapters coordinator, and she also leads the Ohio chapter, and we're delighted that she's able to join us tonight as well. Also, John Wood, who is serving as our interim executive director and president of our board of directors, is with us tonight. He's from Edmonton, Canada. John was here last fall. Some of you may have had the opportunity to meet him at Mr. Darwin's Tree or our Boston chapter event down at Grace Chapel. He and I make up the leadership team here at the ASA, and it's a joy and honor to have him here with us tonight. And remembering that today is 9/11, John, would you please open us with a word of prayer for tonight?
It's such a pleasure to be with you, and we've got Frank Robinson with us joining us tonight out of Palmdale, California. And I've just met Frank this evening, and this is a vital and timely topic that he's going to speak to us on. As Vicki has pointed out, this is also 9/11. These are sobering moments for us as individuals. Many of the young people I'm seeing here, 9/11 is just barely a reality, but it is the world that you were born into. And our world can change in a moment, and this COVID pandemic has also brought that to us. And then we have another challenge. So I'm seeing a real generational shift. So as we come to prayer tonight, our thoughts turn to Scripture, and you think about other times. And in 1 Chronicles 12:32, Israel was facing challenges, and it called on people to step forward. From one tribe came men who knew the times and knew what Israel should do, what they should do. Frank tonight, I think, is one of those men. We're going to hear from him. But as I look out across this audience, I see that all of us here are being called by God at this important moment. So let's pray to the Lord for Frank as he speaks to us and for ourselves as we meet. Let's bow our heads and pray. Father, we do thank you for these few moments that we have together to speak. These are challenging times. We have had much pain, much loss of life. There's much anxiety. There's economic suffering. There's other kinds of suffering, and we're going to hear about that, and we're going to think about it. And Lord, we just want to come to you, open our hands, and receive from you the wisdom that you have given Frank, the insights that you've given him, the journey that he's been on as he talks to us. And Lord, this evening, give us ears to hear what others are saying, the wisdom to know what we must do, and the courage to act on that, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. Vicki?
Thank you, John. Before introducing our speaker tonight, I want to just review this evening's agenda and our Zoom etiquette for the evening. This is what I call a roundtable style event. We did an event at Gordon back in the spring in a roundtable style, and the ASA has been participating in a number of the Cambridge roundtable events hosted by Dave Tom, who I believe is with us tonight, and it's been a great opportunity for us to partner with Dave and use this roundtable style, which I think is really effective and a great way to get to know each other. So Frank is going to come on and speak for about 35 minutes, and then we're going to go into a Q&A time, and Craig Story is going to moderate that. So feel free to type in your questions into the chat feature while Frank is speaking, and then we'll collect them for the Q&A time. After the Q&A time, we're going to go into breakout sessions for about 30 minutes. We'll break out into rooms, and I'll give you some instruction about what that'll look like before we go into the rooms. And then we'll come back together, and we'll give Frank the last word in roundtable style to wrap things up in 2 minutes, and we'll have some closing announcements. It's my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce this evening's speaker. Skylar, my daughter, who is a student ASA member, attended one of Frank's Sunday school classes at my church, the First Congregational Church of Hamilton, where Craig also attends. And The class was on conversations on racism and Christian faith. I did not attend that particular class, but after the class, Skylar came to me on several occasions and said to me, "Mom, you have to have Frank come speak at an ASA meeting." Skylar's attended a number of ASA annual meetings. And she said it a couple times, and she really got my attention. She was really fervent about feeling like Frank should come to speak in an ASA meeting. And so I listened to Frank's talk, and I spoke to Craig, and we both agreed with Skylar that we needed to bring Frank to an ASA meeting. So Frank Robinson is a husband, a father of two, a United States Marine, and a prospective medical student. He earned his bachelor's degree at the United States Naval Academy, and he served as a Marine officer for a total of 13 years, including 8 years on active duty and 2 deployments in support of combat operations overseas. He graduated in May of 2020 from Gordon-Conwell Theological Seminary with an M.Div and an M.A. in counseling. Alongside his seminary studies, he completed premedical coursework at Gordon College. I know many of you know him. Salem State University and Tufts University, and he's just moved back to California, as John has mentioned, and is getting ready to embark on annual drills with the Marine Corps Reserves and then heading to medical school. He is speaking tonight on asymptomatic racism, the silent contagion of hatred in all of us, a hot and important topic in today's world. Please join me in welcoming Frank.
Thank you so much. So good to see all of you, former classmates at Gordon College. It's been too long, and I wanted to acknowledge, along with John's prayer, that this is a difficult time and a time commemorating a difficult time. And I'll just have to acknowledge that not everyone's okay right now. And so my hope and prayer for you all is that you would be safe and well, that the Lord would continue to be with you and give you health and peace during this time. And I hope to make some contribution to that as we talk. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hoping to make at least some contribution to everyone being okay by engaging with the ongoing topics of both COVID-19 and systemic racism. I'm going to compare those two and integrate concepts from biology, from theology, and from sociology to see what we can glean from our knowledge of how a virus works, to talk about how systemic racism works and what we might do about it, hopefully to come up with some protective measures we can take. I don't imagine we'll come up with a vaccine tonight. We'll just sort of kick off the discussion. But we'll see where this goes. Before I do, I want to give a little bit of background about myself, and thank you, Vicki, for the kind introduction. As some background about me, let me see, how do I share this? There we go. I am a black and white biracial male, and so definitively, I'm usually identified as black and identify as such, but I'm of mixed racial heritage. My father, who's in attendance, is a white man who married my mother, a black woman, in Alabama in 1984. At the time, that was about as socially unacceptable as could be. Lynchings were, in fact, the norm back then. It was part of the air they breathed. They received threats of lynching, and in 1985, when I was due to be born, my parents fled to Florida, where it was deemed a little bit less likely that a quote-unquote complication would kill me and my mother. My family later moved to Los Angeles area in California, where my father was one of few white clergy members in a predominantly black church during the 1992 riots. And so the racialized environment of the United States has been a very important part of my upbringing. Pictured on the screen is a book that my father wrote of letters to me. He wrote those basically with the idea that, considering the trend of his life, he might be doing some parenting in absentia. And so he wrote letters to try to help me to integrate my own identity and figure out who I was going to be in this racialized country, while not fitting neatly into one racialized category. The rest, I think, Vicki covered quite well. Went to the Naval Academy, served in the Marine Corps, including a couple deployments. Intended to come back in to active duty as a chaplain after seminary, but was massively distracted by some clinical experiences and worked in psychology, of which Karen Mason was a very large part. She's also in attendance. And redirected towards medical school with a goal of becoming a psychiatrist one day. So that is part of how all these ideas got mashed up in a really mixed up head, that it was currently studying theology and psychology. And so we have on our hands a tale of two viruses. COVID-19, which currently in the United States, we have 2.3 million cases and nearly 180,000 deaths from COVID-19, and systemic racism, which has plagued our country for about 400 years. I'm certainly not the first person to make the comparison between these two pandemics, but I think they're not only rhetorically connected, they're directly connected in some ways. As a chilling similarity, there are about 2.3 million persons incarcerated in our country at the moment. And the majority of both of those, people affected by COVID-19 and people affected by mass incarceration, are people of color. If you're Black in the United States, you have twice the likelihood of being infected with COVID-19 and dying of COVID-19, and over 5 times the likelihood of our white population of being incarcerated. People of my age, Black males of my age, have 5 times the likelihood of being in prison during their life as the rest of our population does. So with that being said, on June 6th at a rally in Salem, I was speaking there in support of racial justice. I compared these two, and I said that all of our lives were more vulnerable to COVID-19 because some of them were. Because that disproportionate contagion among people of color, not contagion, infection rate, has affected all of us in that we were all more vulnerable to the spread of this disease as a result of that. And so what are the structural factors that influence both? I think we see something that, as the story is told of why the United States is the undisputed worst at dealing with COVID-19 and also has the highest rate of incarcerated persons in the world, I think they're very much connected. So what I hope to do as we go along is explore some of those connections and maybe what we can do about it. We mentioned Francis Collins earlier. I think that's an important point, is that theology has incorporated themes from so many different fields, most notably from law. Calvin was a lawyer, Charles Finney was a lawyer, and integrated concepts from their fields into the field of theology. And I think we have plenty of biblical warrant to do so with medicine as well. Francis Collins' book, The Language of God, is one great example, I think, of that being done, but it hasn't been done enough. I think that when we look through Scripture, we see sin often compared to sickness. We have in the book of Isaiah, by his wounds we are healed. Jeremiah, is there no balm in Gilead? We have in Jesus' career throughout it him healing people and saying things like, go and sin no more, lest the worst thing come upon you. And I think the greatest comparison of sin to sickness is this idea of all throughout Scripture. When someone had a skin infection, or they had a boil, or they had some sort of thing that made them unclean, when they were sick, they had to go outside the camp and declare themselves unclean, be separated from their people. They talk about a stigma, right? Well, we have Jesus, who then goes outside the camp and is crucified outside the camp with them to invite the people who are outside back in. So the author of Hebrews says, therefore, let us go with him outside the camp and bear his disgrace. For we have no continuing city here, but we seek the city that is to come. So Jesus is the healer of our disease because he went to the outside, to the people who were outside, and took the disease upon himself. So I'm going to acknowledge that what I'm about to do will take the metaphor of sin and sickness further than any of the biblical authors intended. None of them knew about a virus. They didn't know about molecules or anything like that, but we believe that none of the discoveries of science are surprises to the ultimate author of Scripture, which is the Lord. And so I think it's fruitful and also warranted to reflect on, well, if sin is a sickness, what are the symptoms? And are there always symptoms? And perhaps if we could qualify sin as disease, could racism be maybe a strain of sin? And if so, like other strains of viruses, could certain strains of sin be destroyed? Could they be defeated? Can we come up with a cure? Certainly medicine hasn't been able to cure death, but it has been able to eradicate some diseases. Smallpox is nothing compared to what it used to be in the world. And so maybe we can do something about this disease of systemic racism. So I'm going to begin our reflection of various things from biology to see what we can gather from it. And the first topic I'd like to bring in is the idea of a retrovirus. What a retrovirus does is essentially it transcribes itself into the DNA of its host such that it's indistinguishable from the host. The immune system can't distinguish it from the host cells, and the virus is essentially impossible to kill without destroying the host cells. So this is part of why HIV is so pernicious, for example, because you can't really help somebody who has it, or at least it's more treatable now, but you couldn't really help someone who has it without killing that person. And so it's really difficult to treat. So just imagining something that infected you so deeply that it essentially became a part of you, inseparable from you, and impossible to kill or get rid of without killing you. I would argue that sin works this way. It inscribes itself into the nature of every human person and is passed to every human offspring. And if you think of it like that, it's not so surprising that the cure for it would come from the DNA of the one man in human history who wasn't infected by it, the blood of Jesus Christ. Another thing I would like to bring in, another idea from biology, is the idea of a lytic and lysogenic life cycle. And this isn't directly comparing to COVID-19, but maybe if you haven't come across this in maybe your beginning classes of biology, you come across it from time to time when a cold sore comes up or something like that. What the lytic phase is when the virus is reproducing in such a way that it has no regard for the survival of the host cells. So you get a blister, you get an immune response, you get symptoms, and it's what we call virulent in that phase. It is not as counterintuitive as it might seem, the desired way of working for the virus. What they would rather do, since it's not really a team win to destroy one's own host, if you're a virus, is to operate beneath the notice of the host organism in such a way that it's not attracting immune response, it's not producing noticeable symptoms, and you might never even know it's there if it continued to operate in that state. And what does that sound like? Well, I think sin in general, as we understand it from Scripture, sometimes is overtly destructive, and we can see it, and we can put our finger on it, and we can come up with laws that outlaw it and discourage it and keep it at bay. But other times it's internal, and it's something that maybe we can't see, like hate, like lust, like maybe things that do have a destructive quality but operate and thrive in silence and secrecy, pornography, sexual predation, things like that. And I think we're getting to a place where we can understand how racism might work, sometimes with overt symptoms and sometimes with things that may not escape our notice. To go one step deeper, in the 1960s, everyone knew that racism was a problem. It was really symptomatic. There were dogs, there were fire hoses, there were people hanging from trees and being burned. And the publicity of that was very shocking to a lot of people. And nobody needed to be convinced that it existed, not only at an individual level, but at a state-sanctioned level in the structures of our society that needed to change. I would ask, as a question, did that go away with the signing of civil rights legislation, such as the Civil Rights Act? Or did it just adopt a more lysogenic phase in a way that it operates beneath our notice I would argue that the strain of sin we call racism does have a lytic and lysogenic phase, that it does sometimes operate in ways that we can see in flags and in acts of hate, and in some ways that we can't see. The water that we swim in our culture that is harmful to people in ways that sometimes escape our notice. So Peggy McIntosh, who coined the term white privilege, says that one factor that seems clear about all these interlocking oppressions is that they have active forms which we can see and embedded forms which, as a member of the dominant group, one is taught not to see. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep moving. But this is that idea of systemic racism. So one might ask, no symptoms, no problem, right? If we just treat the symptoms when they arrive and when they don't show up, not worry about it, what is the problem with that? I would think if we can describe the obvious symptoms of racism as lynching, forms of violence, racial slurs, and things like that, we might also note that there are destructive properties that operate in the absence of those symptoms, such as stereotypes that can be harmful, implicit bias that can be harmful, particularly in policing or in hiring, objectification, privilege, presumption of criminality, being followed around in the store if you've ever had that experience, and microaggression. Those are ways that racism could operate asymptomatically and spread asymptomatically. So one of the problems I think that we have with this term systemic racism, and some people may raise this, is that it comes off as this conspiracy theory. Like there's some great conglomerate government organization whose sole purpose is to persecute minority groups at every end. And I think when described that way, it seems ridiculous. Like no such thing exists, right? Most people are trying to do a good job in government, and I think we can have good faith in that in general. But if we described it like this, like an infection, in an infection, you can have localized symptoms, a wart or a blister or something like that. That's treatable. You can get rid of the thing and be better. Put some cream on the rash and you're okay. But you also have infections that spread to the rest of the body. Now you have muscle aches, you're having trouble breathing, etc. And this is the debate, particularly when it comes to policing, of whether we're dealing with a few bad apples in our system that, when they do something horrible, they go to jail, right? No problem. End of story. Or is there a problem with the system that maybe started out with a few infected cells, but then spreads as it does in the body to the respiratory system, to the nervous system, or by comparison to the healthcare system, the education system, to the legal system. So no giant conspiracy, but something that becomes a matter of not only individual hate, but a problem with our society. Another scientific way to look at it would be in terms of research, and the difference between random error and systemic error. Random error is human error. It's a mistake or something that went wrong in your experiment. If you've been in lab and you've made one of those, you can correct the error and move on, and your experiment is still valid. But with systemic error, you have a problem with the plan. And the experiment is not going to work, the research is not going to be valid unless you correct the problem with the plan. So when we describe systemic racism, we're describing a problem with the plan, with how our society works. It's not just a matter of individual errors, because it's so consistent and so predictable and so common that we recognize that if we change the plan, we might be able to change the situation. If we don't change the plan, we're going to continue to have this situation. So perhaps a more non-threatening and less ridiculous way to think about systemic racism. As another topic from biology that I'd like to bring in is cell recognition and antigen. All of our cells have proteins or glycoproteins or other molecules on the surface that facilitate recognition. Bacteria have them, and we have them. And so when our cells are infected by a virus, an infected cell may present at the surface, say this is an antigen, something like this, and say, if you see this, calling out to the immune system, this is what's killing us. Attack it. It's the enemy. And we develop antibodies for that thing. Our blood types work this way as well. If you have type A, you have type A antigens, so that's the yellow one. If you have type B blood, you have type B antigens. If you have type B blood and your body perceives, or type A blood and you perceive type B antigens in your blood, your body goes, whoa, 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 that's not part of us. That's not a part of our body. We need to get rid of it. And I think that we can say racism operates in a similar way, that there's a very superficial something that is different, that is recognized. And whether intentionally or unintentionally, consciously or unconsciously, at the individual or at the systemic level, there's a hostility or a fear to that something that's different. This isn't one of us. This isn't like us, and can result in harming that person or attacking that difference. And there's a depreciated recognition of those things that are the same and do mark people that are different as part of the same body. So a body that fails to recognize part of itself and attacks other cells that's part of the same body is such as an autoimmune disease. And I think if we're classifying systemic racism as a virus, we can say that it produces an autoimmune response. And this is why it's deadly, because some parts of our same body, of our same society, are being destroyed because they're not recognized as part of us and not something that is for. This is particularly ironic as it's common in the evangelical Christian community, because we have this belief in the image of God, the Salem Elohim. And that's the thing, right? That's the thing in every human person that marks us as similar, as part of the same body and part of the same act of creation that connects us all. So if we're looking for commonality, it should be really easy to find in the Christian faith, the image of God, common to all humankind. So the point of all this, of reflecting on different things we can take from biology into our study of how racism works, is the same way we study viruses in pursuit of a cure or a treatment. Understanding how this works can help us to figure out ways to combat it. And I think a couple we've just suggested. Perhaps if we are unable to identify symptoms of racism, if we don't see what is the problem with our society, is this overblown, then we could look to the antigen-presenting cells, those who are saying, this is what's killing us. This is the problem. We can't breathe. If you see this, make it stop. And then we make that thing stop, right? That could be part of how we deal with our problem with racism, is listening to those voices that are actually heard by us. Another implication is this, that perhaps we can learn to recognize what is common between us. Those proteins, so to speak, or those things about us that mark us as part of the same body, or the us that is in them and the them that is also in us. And this is essentially the premise of what sociologists call contact theory. Contact theory, in its simplest form, is the idea that meaningful contact between groups on equal terms in an environment that reinforces equality rather than disparity necessarily will reduce tension or animosity between those groups. It will improve the relationship between those groups. It has been found in studies to reduce racial animosity. And I want to be careful to not sell this as a panacea to racism, but these environmental factors, this sort of contact, has been found to reduce racism. It's hard to maintain our stereotypes, for example, when they're disconfirmed by meaningful contact. In other words, contact could be a way to see the us in them and the them that is also in us. So we have our tale of two viruses, one that is spread by contact and mitigated by social distance, that is the talk of the town these days, and why we're having this conversation virtually. And one that is mitigated by contact and promoted by social distance, that the distance between us economically and and between neighborhoods, and in other ways, the lack of meaningful contact allows systemic racism to thrive. And so I just offer that as whenever COVID-19 comes to its inevitable conclusion, we can go about our lives the way we used to, Lord may be. Let's keep in mind that the distance between us socially can cause systemic racism to thrive, and we can combat it by closing some of that distance and developing meaningful relationships. And if not, the Bible gives us some safeguards, I would say, when we can't identify the common image in people who are other than ourselves, is that it tells us exactly how people who are different are to be treated. In Exodus, you have God saying that you shall not oppress the sojourner in your land, because you know the heart of the sojourner. You were sojourners in Egypt. In Leviticus 19, the same chapter that Jesus quotes when he talks about the second greatest commandment, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. It says in that same chapter, you shall love the stranger who sojourns with you as a native in your land. You should love him as you love yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Literally says, you will love the immigrant as you love yourself. You must love the refugee as you love yourself. You must love the person who is different from you, who dwells with you, as your neighbor, as you love yourself. These are the words of our Lord. In Psalm 39, the psalmist says, hear my prayer, O Lord, and listen to my cry for help. Do not be deaf to my weeping, for I dwell with you as a foreigner, a stranger, as all my ancestors were. Jesus overtly identifies with the outsider when he says, inasmuch as you did it to the least of the poor, the naked, the sick, those in prison, you did it unto me. As much as you did not do it to the least of these, you did not do it unto me. And so we can sort of imagine any demographic in there, whether it's women, whether it's refugees, whether it's immigrants. Inasmuch as you did not do it to the least of these, you did not do it to me. And finally, I think Luke 16 gives us a great lens to look at the idea of privilege. Often I've heard that word bandied about as a way to almost make people feel guilty for being white, which I don't think is very helpful. And it's not wrong to be white or make people implicitly racist for being white. And I think instead of a matter of guilt, we could look at it simply as a matter of stewardship. Jesus tells a story of a servant who has misused his master's funds and he's about to be fired. And realizing that, he goes around and takes stock of his situation and says, well, this unjust gain is going to be taken from me. I'm going to go make some friends with it. And so he says, hey, you take your debt and make it from 100 into 80. And take yours and make it from 100 into 50. And Jesus commends this servant in the parable, saying that we should make friends with our unrighteous mammon, that when it's taken away, we may be welcomed into an everlasting home. And so the question for all of us, because all of us have unjust gain and all of us have ill-gotten privilege, what do we do with it? Do we use it to advance justice or to make for ourselves friends in an everlasting kingdom, or do we use it for our own benefit? And how will it be for us when we stand in front of our judge in eternity, who was the oppressed every time? Did we do that to him, or are we welcomed into an everlasting home because of the way we've used it? So just as a point of reflection and something to think about, I think that's a good biblical lens rather than just sort of being beaten by the guilt that comes with our history or our privilege. So in closing, I would say that we're all sojourners in this world as our fathers were. We're all strangers. This world is not our home. And so how do we treat the strangers who are here? We all have ill-gotten gain. How do we use it? Do we use it to root out injustice? Do we use it to mitigate the suffering caused by this pandemic of our own country? So that's all I've got for you tonight. I've got some resources. I would encourage you to take a screenshot of this if you would like. Just to highlight a couple that are great for further reading, Gordon Alport's The Nature of Prejudice has shown up in almost every bibliography that I found in my research on prejudice and racism. Everyone points back to him, and I picked it up for myself, and it's an absolute gem. James Baldwin, if you want to get into the ideas behind what it does to a person to get to the point of violence, of rioting, I think it's an insightful read. He espouses a nonviolent approach, but certainly calls out the hypocrisy in insisting on a nonviolent response to violent oppression of people who are in a country that was founded on violent resistance to oppression of a lesser sort. So, as my old physics professor would say, put that in your smoke and pipe it. An excellent read and very well written. Some others here I think you'll enjoy. And a second page, if you're capturing the screen, if you like numbers, second from the bottom there, divided by faith. It's a little dated at the moment, but you have a sociologist who's crunched the numbers on how racism develops in the Christian church, namely in terms of the homogeneous unit principle and how we isolated in disparate groups in order to grow churches that were similar and thereby promoted racism between those groups and other sorts of prejudice. Highly encourage you to read that. And with that, I would like to open the floor for questions. And I have some questions for reflection here, unless anyone has any questions for me.
Yes, there have been some questions on the chat. Thank you so much. That was very, very excellent. I enjoyed that. Very thought-provoking. So let's see, where do we begin? The first question to come in on the chat was a good one, I think. What are some specific examples of current systemic racism?
Okay. I would offer just a couple. So I mentioned microaggression earlier. That's probably I want to mention that because that's everyone's favorite to sort of dismiss. Like, well, that's not really a thing. And just from my Marine background, I can tell you that there's a dismissive attitude when you're used to dealing with actual aggression and maybe like of the hot metal variety of the sort of like hurt feelings idea. Is that racism? Is that oppression? Well, I would give you a couple examples. On the note of public service, say you're a fourth generation Chinese or Korean American. You served your country in combat, you come back, and you still get the question of at the beginning of every conversation, well, where are you from? Well, I'm from California. No, where are you actually from? The implicit message being that you're not from here, you're not one of us, and at no point can you be just an American. That's one example of things that tend to accrue and have a cumulative effect. And you can imagine how that will feel, maybe being followed around in a store or things like that. And these are individual acts, but this is a systemic dynamic. Another example would be our incarceration rate. Well, how's that systemic oppression? Isn't it just related to a greater level of crime that exists among minority populations? Well, no. To substantiate that, I would highly recommend Natalia Alexander's work, The New Jim Crow. I think that exposes in great detail, with great research, a note section that's about 30 pages long, how the war on drugs in particular was disproportionately targeted towards people of color, and disproportionately affected them, not only during their prison sentences, but afterwards when they're prevented from voting. It becomes difficult to get a job and engage in society and things like that. These are ways that our society operates structurally that disproportionately affect people of color. And so I would encourage you to continue educating yourself on those things. Those are just two examples.
Dorothy brought up another. Dorothy brought up another, which is that a lot of highly polluting industries are located in areas that are near poor people and people of color. So that's another example where our society just dumps on the poor and the non powerful, if you will, in our society.
Absolutely. And that gets at another sort of, I suppose, convenient dismissal of the idea of systemic racism. As some people will say, isn't it just an economic thing? Doesn't it just affect poor people, not people of color, Black people, or Latino? And I would point out that, again, the structures of our society have all but ensured the poverty of certain demographics among us historically. So if you haven't heard about the Tulsa massacre that destroyed many Black businesses and opportunities of Black wealth, I would encourage you to read about that. If you haven't heard about how our GIs coming back from World War II, some of them ended up with, actually, I've got two grandfathers who fought in World War II. One of them came back to a GI loan and bought a nice home for his family, which he was able to raise them in. The other came back to a $100 check, which was a tenth of what he was owed for his service, and told by the person who gave him the check, hey, you just deal with it with no recourse. He did not receive a GI loan. He did not receive that sort of start for his family. And so you can see that how that might affect an entire generation of people based solely on color, that one of which is homeowners and has an opportunity to build wealth, and the other which absolutely doesn't, and continues to live under Jim Crow laws.
Yeah, that's right. So certainly there's a connection, this correlation between poverty and these problems. But the poverty is, the root of that was very largely laid on this racist policies that led to that poverty in those communities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I would encourage anyone who's asking this or similar questions, as you do your own research, the question I have for you is what is your threshold at which you will believe this is no longer, it's not a coincidence? Because I think everyone has a measure of proof that they need to be able to see this. At what point will you deny the belief that this is a bunch of different coincidences and not part of a larger social problem that we need to deal with? Because I think the evidence is overwhelming, if not in economics, in our legal system, in our sentencing, in our arrest rates, in the employment, in the workspace, employment opportunities, in promotions in the military, in any number of spaces, we can see a racial disparity that we cannot just attribute to performance or criminality.
Going to your analogy at the beginning of the viral integration into the DNA, so I put myself as sort of in that cell as my existence, not noticing there was anything wrong because it's just a piece of DNA there. Never having been taught about any of this stuff in school, having to wait till middle age to learn about the fact that realtors would be fired if they sold a house to a Black family in Marblehead. This is just not common knowledge among white folks, and yet it is among Blacks, but they're not the ones writing the textbooks. So it's just so frustrating. Yeah,
right.
Or there's a lot more questions. Go ahead.
Yeah. As an example, I showed my family the old Disney film, The Incredible Journey, not too long ago. And you see this like idyllic world where the dogs are running free and you have this epic adventure and they come home. It's a tear-jerking thing. And just realizing that at that time, it wasn't so idyllic. It wasn't this beautiful sort of technicolor ideal world that was sort of portrayed for everyone at that time. And if that is what you're raised in, if this idea of our society as a beautiful land of the free is what you were raised in, then it is hard to believe that that's not true. But I would encourage you to see the evidence of people who, as I suggested earlier, are presenting the antigen. This is killing us. Please make it stop.
So another thought that has come up a little bit offline is how do we correct the situation? I mean, one answer is affirmative action, which strikes some people the wrong way. I mean, obviously that's going to help reverse that. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that and What other kind of contact theory you mentioned? And people have raised questions about that. I find that fascinating. But maybe mention the first, and then we can continue on the second.
Yeah, I would love to say I knew what the cure was. I don't, but I think that we can trace it in some areas where we see a problem. And this is what I was getting at with the antigen. I'm really talking about George Floyd, and I'm talking about Ahmaud Arbery, and I'm talking about these things that we can actually see. Well, we need to deal with those as the barest of first steps. That's something we can do. I think as part of the contact, listening to the ways people's lives have been affected by this. How is the water different for them than it is for me, and how might that feel? I think another example is I had recently a neighbor who had the police called on them while they were moving in because somebody saw them parked in a place they shouldn't be parked, but also in a place where a lot of other people park and moving their stuff in, and they had the police called. This generated some significant online debate in the community as to whether that was racially motivated or not. But simply asking the question, how might that feel to be welcomed in your neighborhood in that way? Or how might it feel to be followed in a store as you were presumed to be more likely to do something wrong? How might it feel to walk into an interview and not know whether you're going to be looked down upon or looked at as similar to any number of mugshots that someone saw on the news that day? How might that feel? Is a good way to get at what the experience is like, and then maybe address the reality of that experience. How can we change?
Here's a thought following on that, and even a little bit on the affirmative action, because there's some thought that maybe that just perpetuates kind of attention. So someone else named Frank Robinson wrote this little thing that's really good here, I think. The Leviticus reference went from love for and treatment of strangers to weights and measures. Using your metaphor does a renewed attendance to the measures we use, an intentional reevaluation of using the same measure in every arena, at every table, create hopeful treatment for this disease. So I know job interviews that are blind and music interviews of musicians that are behind a curtain, and these kind of steps to kind of level the playing field. I don't know if that's what you had in mind.
Yeah. I think the idea of weights and measures definitely gets to implicit bias, and one place I think we can see that is in the outcomes of court proceedings. Not too long ago, there was a person who assaulted an unconscious woman sexually, and the immediate instinct of people who saw that scenario, who was found guilty of that, was to say, what a promising career he had. He's a Stanford swimmer. He's got such a future ahead of him. Let's reduce his sentence. Let's keep this light. And he ended up being sentenced for 6 months and serving 3 out of those. However, it seems with a large population among us, the instant reaction when someone is shot, when a black man is shot and killed, is well, he had a gun, or well, we didn't see what happened before the camera started rolling. And I think that instant reaction tells us something about our implicit bias, but it also tells us something about the destructive effect of that. In this case, both enabling sexual assault and allowing the murder of unarmed black men to continue. So affecting our bias, however we can get at that, and I think contact is definitely a way to help with it, is important. We've got to be able to have just measures. A different initial reaction in both of those cases is evidence of an unjust measure of something that's not the same in both cases.
I have another, thank you for that. I have another thread here about contact theory. Maybe you could expand a little bit on that as it relates to changes over the years in church teachings towards race relations, such as Christians in contact with slaves becoming more aware and less prejudiced, And then I had written my own question, which was, are there examples of societies where this contact occurred or has occurred and been encouraged, and is there less racism in certain societies? So I guess the church and then society on this question.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. I can't see the chat because I'm still sharing the screen, but that's a very important point. I don't want to suggest, because that was the one idea that I shared, that it's the only or the primary way of reducing racism. Contact theory does have some limitations, and one of them we can see plainly when someone says something incredibly racist and then says, but I can't be racist because I have a black friend. Well, it seems like they do have that meaningful contact, and yet the racism exists. So it is not an end-all, be-all cure. As for historical examples, off the top of my head, I mentioned some structural things that may be racist in effect in the military, but I think the military is also an example where a lot of those divisions break down. That fighting next to somebody and shedding your blood next to somebody can tend to reduce your animosity towards that person, and you're developing perhaps a bond rather than something else. So I've learned to salute people who are different from me. I've learned to respect people who are different from me by being forced into those sort of shared hardships. I would say that COVID-19 might be a great opportunity to do so, because it's affected us all and it has hurt us all. We have significant shared experience as a result of this. And maybe it's a good moment where we can reach out to some of the same things we're reaching out to people who are like us. I don't know what's going on in your family. You have enough to eat. I've got a little bit of extra. Do you want to come over and get it? That sort of thing. And I'm just spitballing an idea there. As for other societies, I can't really think of one off the top of my head. So I would have to answer that question with a no. I can't provide an example. But that doesn't mean there aren't examples. So I apologize for my ignorance.
I think maybe societies,
politics.
perhaps societies of very young children don't notice color. I don't know if that's been studied. Any psychologists in the audience? Yeah, so I was just wondering, noticing, celebrating difference versus, that's sort of what you want. You want to not necessarily negate the difference of culture, of where you're from, that kind of thing, but to not fear it, right? That's sort of the natural instinct. So does that require overriding our natural instincts, and how is that possible without the Holy Spirit? It seems like the Christian church is the solution, but we haven't done a very good job of it historically.
Yeah, we should be. You would think we were the solution, and unfortunately we haven't. And so that's a really sticky problem. And I'm really glad you brought it up, but I've sort of lost my train of thought there. I had something that might be helpful, but it's gone.
Yeah, the Holy Spirit. We need that to keep us from sinning, which is to put down our brother and sister.
Yeah. I think on no uncertain terms, and by no means do I think that we've invented prejudice. Racism, as it is now, is relatively new in human history. But there have been animosities against people who are quote unquote other all along, and this is maybe a human tendency. Oh, yeah, you're getting at your question of contact theory and how that's developed. Glad you brought that up. So the Gordon Alport book that I recommended, that sprang out of a response to Germany, World War II, and the question of how could Nazism take hold in what appears to be one of the most advanced nations and societies in the world. Such a banal or such a primitive sort of conception of human difference. And what he described was that every human being needs an in-group. We all need to have people who are our people, and we need to define ourselves within a group. And sometimes what occurs is that we do so, we reinforce our in-group by denigrating an out-group. And so maybe observing ways that we're doing that and trying to not, maybe have more positive ways of developing our in-group without attacking an out-group. He's got a chapter on the political demagogue because there's a pattern that's emerged throughout history. The source of all of our problems, it's them. It's those people. And you know what? Only I can help you. Listen to me. Follow me. And the rest is history, whether it's, Hitler or, any number of political figures that have arisen with that script. So we can see the pattern emerging, and I think we can see also the lytic and lysogenic phases repeating over and over throughout history. It's something that's problematic, but I think as we observe it, we can do something about it.
There's an interesting question here. This comes up as almost like an uncomfortable question to ask a Black individual. But so you're a mixture, right? And so what about your whiteness? I'm paraphrasing it in my own phrase, So it just seems so odd to me as a biologist speaking to a science group, it's just so arbitrary, the skin color, right? There's so many other characteristics that we vary on, whether it's height or eye shape or, hairy ears or whatever, but it just happens to be the Black. And that's because it's, I guess, so obvious. You can't escape that skin tone. And it's sort of universal in India and all around the world, this color thing. So, yeah. So what happens to one's half whiteness? I mean, Obama too, right? Same thing. He's equal Black, but yet the culture.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I described the ways in which society oppresses and discriminates against people of color. As a biracial person, I'm also white. I'm exactly as white as I am Black, and I think you have two good points. One is that you see the arbitrary nature of race. It is a social construct. It's not a biological reality by any means, that we're somehow essentially different. It's one of tens of thousands of traits that we've arbitrarily seized upon to discriminate by. The second thing I think that you've hit on is identity. And this is based on the resources page that I showed you, Sue and Sue's book on counseling the culturally diverse, was getting at how we manage the multicultural dynamic in counseling. And what he points out is that for so many different ethnic groups, there's a process of identity development. However, there isn't one for being white. What is a white racial identity? Do we know what that means? Do we know how that develops? Is there a healthy way that can develop without it being oppressive towards others perceived as such? And I would suggest that because of that void, because we don't have a healthy, socially acceptable way to develop one's racial identity as a white person, that creates the situation where you're more likely to define that identity by what you're not. And as I was saying earlier, define your in-group by potentially attacking the out-group. So maybe a question we need to deal with as a society is, what does it mean to be white? And how can we be a white person in a healthy manner? Do we have a culture? Can we describe our identity development in a racialized context as a white person? That I don't have the answer to, but I would like to suggest is a very fruitful line of questioning for how we can deal with our problem of race. Is we need to probably develop a healthy white racial identity, since race is a thing with us.
Craig, I'm gonna jump in here.
Thanks,
These
Vicky.
questions could go on forever, and a great discussion you have going on here. I appreciate Scott Dyer asking that question, and I was hoping that you would choose it, Craig. We're gonna take an opportunity now to go into roundtable style discussion, not around a table, but in a breakout room. And so Becky has the rooms all ready to go. So we're going to take an opportunity now in a again, typical roundtable style, to give Frank the last word. So Frank, if you want to say a few words in 2 minutes or less, feel free.
Want to thank everyone for listening. I hope I've inspired some new ideas. Certainly, it's just the beginning of integrating biology with theology and addressing these issues. And I know there are many in the room or many in the audience who can take these ideas further than I have and with a greater base of knowledge than I have. And I encourage you to do so. I hope you will continue to engage in these issues and integrate whatever base of knowledge that you have to help us understand it and hopefully do something about it. The haunting question of what to do next, I think, is really hard to answer. And in a lot of the books I was reading about it, the authors didn't answer either. You're trying to get to this point where we've described the problem and we go, well, what now? And as one more hint, I was reflecting on ways in which I'm in the majority and I'm in a privileged situation. And two of those were as a male in the military and as a male in seminary. I found myself in the majority and I found myself in a privileged position. And what I found that in those settings, I felt impelled to say something about when I felt that women were not given the opportunities that everyone else had. And all that to say that my experience in the minority informed my behavior in the majority and caused me to advocate. And I would encourage you, when you find yourself in an empowered position, to advocate for others. After you've engaged in what that might be like and described these problems and understood them, advocate. Do what you can to bring about the just society we desire. Finally, I have a prediction that the current conversation is quite binary. We're talking about white and black primarily. But the conversation's larger than that. It also includes gender. It also includes all the other ethnicities, such as our Native American populations, our Latino or Hispanic populations, immigrant populations. And the question for them all can be the same, which is, what does that feel like? And how does our society conspire in some ways against their success and well-being, and what can we do about it? So as the conversation expands, I would encourage our reflection in a broader lens as we continue to do what we can to make our society more just for everyone.
Thank you, Frank. Very, very good. Let's give Frank a virtual round of applause. Very thought-provoking. And yes, you're right. These are issues and questions that a lot of us are wrestling with on multiple levels. So we appreciate you being with us tonight. We'll be posting the video on our website, and if you're willing to share your slides, we'd love to post those as well. Right now, I'd like to introduce one of the Gordon College student leaders that's with me. Angie Cornwell, I see you here in the crowd, and Angie is our faculty liaison that has been working with the students for the last couple of years, and it's been a real joy to get to know them and to work with them and partner with them. And the Boston chapter has done a number of things with the Gordon student chapter, but Caitlin's going to come and talk about a number of activities and ideas that they have planned for this upcoming year. So take it away, Caitlin.
Okay, so I'm unmuted now. So I am part of the ASA for the Gordon student chapter. And I just wanted to talk about the events that we have planned this fall. We're hoping to have 2 speakers, one of them, James Shirley, and we're hoping that he can come to campus or see what we can do with COVID regulations. And he would be leading a discussion on the topic of abortion. So we're hoping for like a roundtable event, and whether it's in person or over Zoom, like we're hoping to have that happen this fall. Also with Cy Gart, I believe it will be over Zoom, and it will be talking about his experience with coming to Christ. And for Gordon students who are interested in being a part of the club, we will be having movie nights, of course, with the COVID regulations and social distancing. And if you're interested in any of the events or being a part of the club, please email asa@gordon.edu, and you can also find us on Gordon 360. So we're hoping with COVID that we can have a lot of these events take place, but also with the regulations and following the guidelines.
Well, thank you, Caitlin. It was nice. I was on campus last week, and I met with the group in the Science Center, and it was great to see everybody in person. And this student chapter really is a lively chapter. They've got some wonderful ideas, as you can tell, and so we're excited to partner with them. I want to mention to you another event that we have planned at the national level, and that's another member assembly meeting coming up in October. It's titled Leading Lives of Purpose, the Science of Discerning Your Calling and Work for a Lifetime, together with Brian Dick, who is an ASA member out at Colorado State. He's a specialist in vocational psychology. We'll explore the dynamics of our careers in the sciences. So that's coming up in October. Be on the lookout for that. And like I mentioned earlier, any of you students that are in the audience, our student memberships are free. So please join and become a part of this great organization and get engaged with the Gordon Student Chapter. And any non-students in the audience that are not members, we're also offering a promotional one-year membership. So take advantage of that promo code that we provided, and we'll be communicating with you over email as well. And anybody that's interested in participating in the Boston chapter, we welcome your ideas. If you have ideas of topics and speakers that you'd like to see us host, certainly be in touch with us, and we'd love to hear from you. So again, thank you for being with us. It was great to see everybody, and have a great weekend. God bless.